Hello, everyone, and welcome into Coach Craig's Sports. And I'm coming at you today with some more NFL draft content. This time, I'm going to be doing like an NFL Combine preview. So I'm going to be going through position by position the players that got invited, and I'm just going to mention some of the guys that I think it's probably going to be the most important for, or kind of things that I think are going to be most important for them, whether that's actual testing out or health, interviews, anything else like that. So we're going to start off at the quarterback position. I'm not going to list every single player here because there's a lot of players that I don't think are going to have too much to lose or gain. But we'll start off with Brady Cook out of Missouri. Health's going to be a big one for him, and then what's his mechanics look like? I remember listening somewhere where they were talking about him changing his mechanics earlier on in the season, and it didn't look like he had the same velocity coming out most of the season, but kind of reverted back to his old mechanics and looked a little bit better at that point in time. So that will be one notable thing for him. And then his athleticism could be a big calling card as well. Quinn Ewers is probably the next one. How's the interview? How's he test? And what's that arm strength look like? Then I'm going to jump all the way down to Will Howard. I think a big question mark for him is just going to be that arm strength. What does it look like, especially when he's throwing the ball at the combine? Same thing could be said about Riley Leonard and his ability to throw on time, which was looking pretty good at the Senior Bowl. Kyle McCord, I think, is the quarterback that probably has the most to gain this week overall, showing off that arm strength, showing off that anticipation, showing off that accuracy. He has a chance to bounce as high as quarterback number 3. I know some people might disagree with that, but he is a very talented quarterback at the end of the day. Then we move down to Graham Mertz, who I actually was surprised was invited to the NFL Combine. He is going to be a big health one. He injured his knee and missed most of this year, so we'll see kind of what it looks like for him. Jalen Milroe, probably another guy that has the most to gain. If he goes out there and if he tests, and he tests really well, as we would expect, then obviously that's going to be a big thing. I'm not sure if he's going to run or not, but we really need to see that accuracy, especially in that short and intermediate game for him. That is a way that he could show very big improvements, which was not something he really did at the Senior Bowl. Moving down to Curtis Rourke, he's just another guy that we need to see if he's healthy or not. Obviously, he was invited to the Shrine Bowl, but did not participate there due to health reasons. And then for Shedeur Sanders, I really don't expect him to throw. I just expect him to weigh in and do some interviews. Not too much else there. Cam Ward's probably the same thing, but Cam Ward might ultimately end up throwing, but he'll probably just wait to his pro day either way. Tyler Shuck would be the last guy, just kind of seeing that health with him. Obviously, he's had a lot of season-ending injuries out in his 7 seasons of college football, and then being able to see that arm strength on display once again. And then moving down to the running back group, a lot of this is probably going to be more on the weigh-in side. So LaQuinn Allen, we did pretty good at the Senior Bowl. I'd like to see how well he tests and everything too. And then it's Julius Bentley, the 4th out of Ole Miss. He's a guy that didn't participate in the Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, anything else like that. So he is a guy that's kind of behind the 8 ball. Same thing can be said about a lot of these guys that didn't participate in those All-Star Game events. They really have to kind of get their name back on the stage. Jane Blue is going to be a guy that speed is the calling card. Let's see how fast he runs. Taj Brooks is a big guy in terms of how athletic is he actually. Very patient runner, very good runner in college, but does that translate to the NFL level? Probably going to bounce down all the way to Ollie Gordon now. What's he weighing at, and how well does he test? RJ Harvey's another guy too. What does that 40 time look like? What does that 3-cone look like? A lot of room for him to go up, especially in that pass game department if he puts on a clinic in those drills as well. And then obviously Travion Henderson, we're going to see how fast he ultimately does end up running, which is expected to be very quick. Jordan James is another guy out of Oregon. He's a guy that was not invited to an All-Star game, so he's going to have to put a name out for himself. Obviously, Ashton Genty, everybody knows about. Then we're going to keep moving down. I think like Woody Marks is probably the next one to talk about how athletic is he actually. Obviously, we know he's a good pass catcher. He's decent in the run game. Damian Martinez, how good is that long speed for him? There is some concern there from some people, but he's a bigger running back. And he does have decent speed for his size, though. And he was pretty good out of the backfield this season. So I think there's definitely room for him to go up. Kyle Monunga out of Rutgers is kind of like a forgotten guy at this point in time. Wasn't in an All-Star Game event. So he's a guy to keep an eye out on. How does he ultimately end up testing? Devin Neal will get down to how well does he test? How athletic is he actually? Because we know he's productive. He's a good, solid player. But what does that athleticism look like at the end of the day? And then I'm probably going to get down to Camp Scadaboo. What does he weigh in at? How well does he test? That could play a major role for him. And then the last guy that's probably in the running back position that I'm watching the most is going to be Bashal Tutin out of Virginia Tech. There are some rumors that he is going to fly. So if that's the case, he could see his stock go up a little bit, maybe even as a potential kick returner at that NFL level. Then we move down to the wide receivers. I'm going to start right off with Andrew Armstrong out of Arkansas. He's a guy that I really don't know too much about. He wasn't an all-star game event or anything else like that, so he is a name to watch out for, see how he tests here, because he's kind of behind the 8 ball for some of these other guys. I'll move down to Jack Bech next. He is a guy that I really want to see that 3-cone out of, see how good his change of direction is, because we know it's pretty good, and that was that long speed ultimately look like for him. I don't expect anything too quick, but how bad is it at the end of the day? Then after him, we got Isaiah Bond. How fast does he fly for them, and is he healthy? I know he dealt with a little bit of ankle injury at times this season. Ja'Cory Brooks is another guy that I want to see how he tests. Change of direction, long speed, how's he look catching the ball? Because he's a very interesting player overall. He was a guy that when he was at Alabama, when they asked all the other Alabama wide receivers who was the next guy up, pretty much everybody said him at that point in time. Moving down here just a little bit more, most of these guys, I think we kind of know what they're going to be, what they're kind of going to test like. Ty Felton is a guy I'm very interested in out of Maryland. How well does he ultimately end up testing? Because he had a great season, pretty good career for Maryland overall, and I think he's just a very interesting prospect. And if he tests really well, I think there's a lot of room for him to skyrocket up. Obviously, we got Matthew Golden, who was kind of a surprise declare, but did play very well in the college football playoffs. Was not in an all-star game event. How well does he test? Trey Harris, is he healthy? Is he not? And if he's able to test, what does that look like? Jaden Higgins, big wide receiver out of Iowa State, was that change of direction and long speed look like for him overall? Next guy is probably Torrey Horton out of Colorado State. Is he healthy? Is he able to test? What does that look like? Everybody's going to be talking about Travis Hunter. He's listed technically as wide receiver and defensive back now, so everybody was kind of making a big deal out of it early on in the process because they listed him as defensive back. He will be testing, if he ultimately ends up testing with the defensive backs group, but doing drills with both sides as well as his interviews. And then we move down to Tez Johnson. How big is he at the combine? Because he was pretty tiny at Senior Bowl. Has he put on any weight since then? And then how quick is he at the end of the day too as well? Josh Kelly's another one. Just wasn't an all-star game for Texas Tech, big wide receiver. We're going to have to see what he looks like at the combine. Then I think I'm just going to move all the way down to Nick Nash. So he's coming off a very, very impressive season. But what does that testing ultimately look like for him? He is a former quarterback turned wide receiver. Only played the position for about 2.5 years now. And depending on how that testing is, that's going to play a big role in his draft position. I'd like to see how well Jalen Knoll tests out of Iowa State, how big he ultimately ends up being as well. Jalen Royals is going to be a big one for me. Coming off that injury, I was not impressed with him at the Senior Bowl whatsoever. I know some people still really like him, but he looked kind of sluggish there. So is he healthy, and what's he test like? Arian Smith after him should fly out of Georgia, but we'll have to see what he looks like in the skills drills because he's a guy that had a ton of drops. And then we keep moving down. I will mention the two Ole Miss wide receivers, Jordan Watkins, who did not participate in an All-Star game, and Juice Wells, who was at the Shrine Bowl. I want to see what they test like. Juice Wells was a guy I did like before injury quite a bit. Teo Reese Jr. is another guy that I thought just looked really good at the Shrine Bowl, and I think he has the potential to test decently well and improve his draft stock at the same time as well. And then the last guy that we'll probably talk about is Savion Williams. Did not participate in the Senior Bowl, and he's a guy that a lot of people like, but athletic testing is going to play a major role in that. Then I'm going to move down to the tight end group. Obviously, Elijah Arroyo had a really good Senior Bowl. We'll see what he looks like in testing out. Jake Briningstool is the guy that looked really small at the Senior Bowl. We'll see if he put on any weight since then. Harold Plannon Jr., what's his weight look like? How well does he test? Terrence Ferguson, how well does he test? Most of these guys are just going to be how well do they ultimately end up testing, but it's a really good tight end group overall. Colston Loveland, we haven't seen in a minute out of Michigan, so obviously he's going to kind of try to remind us of why he is one of the top tight ends in this class overall. Mainly it's just how well do these guys ultimately end up testing, but it's a good group. I'm not going to talk too much in depth about that group just in general. Moving down to the offensive line, obviously the measurables will play a very big role for this group, and then how well do they ultimately end up testing. Not like too much I want to talk about here, but I think there are some guys that will test out relatively well. Kelvin Banks Jr. is probably going to be one of them. Josh Connerly, I would expect to test out really well at the same time as well. And then just like some of these other guys, it's how good of shape do they come in. Some of the smaller school guys like Charles Grant out of William & Mary that did not go to the Senior Bowl. Is he healthy? What's he test out like? What does he look like in those positional drills? Is he a guard? Is he a tackle? Donovan Jackson's another one. We haven't seen him in Ohio State. What does he look like in the drills? How well does he test? Is he a guard? Is he a tackle? Because I think he could potentially play both at the NFL level. Going to be a lot of guys that have that same type of question mark, though. Are they a guard? Are they a tackle? Is there anybody that we don't expect to take reps at center that kind of takes some center reps in some of these drills at the same time as well? The health of Josh Simmons out of Ohio State down here is going to be a pretty big one, too, as well. I do not expect him to test, though. And then just trying to see if there's anybody else that really, truly stands out. Not really. I think Cameron Williams probably be another big one out of Texas. He was, a one-year starter, bigger body guy. How well does he test? How does he look in those positional drills? Moving down to defensive line, I think I'm probably going to have a little bit more to say at the defensive line position just in general. I want to see a little bit out of Yaya Black out of Iowa because he did not look good at the Senior Bowl, so he has to do something to try to regain his stock. If you want to go back up to Darius Alexander out of Toledo, I think he's going to perform very well in the drills and pretty decent in testing at the same time as well. Abdul Carter, what does he weigh in at? And if he ultimately ends up testing, what does that look like? Donovan Ezeraku is probably going to be another big one for me. What's that 3-cone look like? What's that 10-yard split look like for him? And how big is he at the combine? Mike Green's probably a guy that has solidified his position pretty well, but he could definitely help himself out at the same time as well. Derek Harmon, I know, is a guy that a lot of people like. We'll see what his testing looks like ultimately, though. Landon Jackson is probably the next guy I want to talk about. Is he healthy? What's that injury history look like for him? And how well does he test? And what size does he actually come in and weighing at? So that is another guy definitely in play. Walter Nolan, what's that testing look like? Him, Omar, and Norman Lott right behind him if Norman Lott's healthy. I will say that because he left the Senior Bowl early due to injury. And then we have Oladefe Oladejo, probably mispronouncing his name, out of UCLA, linebacker convert. How well does he test? Because he looked amazing at the Senior Bowl. And what does he look like in those positional drills? That could very much skyrocket his draft stock. James Pierce Jr., how big is this guy and how well does he test? Because that is going to be a big, big role for him just in general. I like Ainias Peebles quite a bit out of Virginia Tech. I think he's a guy that could also test out very well. And then as we keep moving down, Q Robinson out of Alabama is probably another guy. How well does he test? And how far can he move up draft boards? TJ Sanders, another one that's going to be a quick step off the line for interior defensive linemen. What do some of these other guys look like? Jack Sawyer, Nick Gordon, JT Tuimoloau. How well do all those guys kind of test? Josiah Stewart's probably going to be another one. How big is he when he weighs in? Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M looked really good at the Senior Bowl. How well does he test and what does he weigh in at? That is going to be a big one for him. I think David Walker is going to be another one. How big is he? How well does he test out? That's probably it for the defensive line group. I think there's a lot of interesting guys here and a lot that we'll be tracking overall. In terms of the linebackers, I think it's kind of like that tight end group. I think there's a lot of decent players here, just trying to see how well they test and how big some of these guys come in at. And I think there's going to be some pretty notable standouts in this group overall. I do like Jeffrey Bassa quite a bit. Jahad Campbell could be a pretty big one. How well does he test out of Alabama? That could very much determine whether he's a first-round pick, second-round pick, or maybe he falls a little bit at the end of the day at the same time as well. Demetrius Knight is a guy I do like. I think he's a guy that could test out pretty well. Nick Martin, I think, is going to be pretty quick. Swessinger out of UCLA, we'll see what he looks like. I think he opted out of the Senior Bowl due to injury, so we'll keep an eye out on him. And then Jalen Walker, how big does he show up and how well does he test? And is he going to be more of an edge prospect or a linebacker prospect, even though he is grouped in with the linebackers? Moving down to the defensive backs, so our cornerbacks and safeties. Going to be a pretty interesting group here. I'm going to be very interested to see what these guys weigh in at, what their arm length is, and how fast they do ultimately end up running. Zy Alexander out of LSU, he's a guy that has had quite a few injuries in his past, so medical is going to be a big one for him. Trey Amos, how fast does he run? If he runs quick enough, he should be a first-round pick. Jahdae Barron, some people want to know kind of what his size is going to be in that. Billy Bowman Jr., how quick does he run? Because if he doesn't run quick, I could see him ultimately falling to the tail end of day 3 or maybe going undrafted. Obviously, we've seen Kobe Bryant was smaller than we expected at the Shrine Bowl. Moving down here a little bit more, was Nick Emmanwori out of South Carolina. How much does he weigh in at and how well does he ultimately end up testing? Moving down just a little bit more, obviously you want to see Travis Hunter. Talked about him at wide receiver. What does he look like at both positions and if there's any strong lean one way or another? Will Johnson, is he healthy at this point in time? Is he going to test? Is he not going to test? I would expect him to be more of testing at Michigan Pro Day just in general, if I had to guess. Malachi Moore out of Alabama, he's a guy that I think could rise up some boards if he does end up testing pretty well. Benjamin Morrison, was that injury look like for him out of Notre Dame? Andrew Makuba out of Texas, I think if he tests really well, he's another guy that could rise quite a bit. Darian Porter was one of the fastest guys at the Senior Bowl, according to their Zebra technologies. So it'll be very interesting to see how quick he ultimately ends up running. And then after him, Caleb Bransaw is a guy that I do like quite a bit out of Tulane. Has the potential to play safety, has the potential to play slot. What does that 3-cone look like for him? Because if he puts up a pretty good 3-cone, I think he's going to be a very, very good pick in the slot overall. Siobhan Ravel, was that injury look like for him? Probably not going to test out either way. Quincy Riley, is he healthy at this point in time, and how quick does he run? Malachi Starks, I'm not sure if he's going to test out of Georgia. Might stay around for Georgia Pro Day, but What does he look like? What does he look like in the drills? Do they try to test him out a little bit in the slot? Do they try to test him out a little bit at safety? Could be pretty interesting there. Then Upton Stout, what does his 3-cone look like? Because he's probably going to ultimately end up in the slot. A lot of these guys, it's really just how well they're going to test overall, especially like a guy like Noel Williams out of Cal. If he runs fast enough, he's ultimately a guy that could cement his spot in day 2. But that's kind of just a quick little rundown, guys. I'm watching, guys I'm kind of looking out for. If there's anybody in specific you have a question about or you're kind of looking out for at the NFL Combine, be sure to drop it down in the comment section. Definitely would love to hear it and start some discussion down there as well. And then once the Combine's over, I will be doing kind of a risers and fallers video. Ideally, in a perfect world, I'd probably like to do it each day, but might ultimately end up just being like one big video, kind of going position by position and going from there. But definitely very excited for the NFL Combine. Should be a great weekend overall. Definitely excited to see the measurables for these guys, how well they test, how well they look in the drills, and everything else like that. But with that being said, if you are brand new to my channel, checking out for the very first time, or have yet to subscribe, please consider doing so. Definitely would appreciate it. Helps to build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports, which is one that's truly for you, the viewers, helping you with your DFS. Right now, we have NBA DFS in terms of the core picks Tuesday through Friday. And right now, I have been dropping some NFL draft content as I do have time to do so. Definitely excited for the NFL draft for this season. And then last but not least, if you're interested in sports betting, if you're interested in prop betting whatsoever, be sure to check out the links and promo codes down in the description below for BetUS, Parlay Play, and Prize Picks. If you're a brand new user on any one of those 3 sites, when you sign up, make your initial deposit, you will get a first match deposit bonus. For Prize Picks and Parlay Play, it's 100% match up to $100. And then for BetUS, it's 125% match up to $2,000. So some pretty great opportunities to be had out there. If you have any other additional questions related to that whatsoever, feel free to reach out to me, whether it's down in the comment section of this video or on Twitter at Coach Craig Sport. But with that being said, that's all that I truly have for today's video. Definitely do appreciate each and every one of you tuning in. Definitely means a lot to me. I hope that each and every one of you have a great rest of your day, no matter what day you're watching this video on, and hope you all have the opportunity to enjoy the NFL Combine, whether that's in person, watching it on TV, or just catching up with some of the highlights or some of the content that I will be putting out in the very near future at the same time as well.